presentations are going to actually be Al Spector and me, and then we'll turn to Abhishek. So, Al, I'll run the slides. This is,
I
and
see
I
them in
will
front of
obey.
us.
Great.
Great. So I am presenting for Julia, who you all know, Michael Stebbins, who is an OSTP and runs his own organization, Advising, and myself, where I've had a role in academia, in business for probably 2/3 of my career, with some government service sprinkled in the middle a bit. I think what we wanted to do with this paper and what we'd like to convince you of is that perhaps we can synthesize some of the best ideas that are happening in the private sector that do such a good job at motivating the large-scale collection and generally rather important and useful application of data, trying to do the same sort of thing in worlds where there's public data. So next slide, Julia. So look, we all understand the enormous benefit that can come from data. We've been talking about it all, but we haven't really talked quite as much about the real challenges that we have. Government agencies that feel underfunded because people don't understand what we're trying to achieve and the difficulty of doing things really well. Frankly, the challenge that we have within public data organizations to prioritize what's really important. It's natural to do what we've done before. It might even be necessary or mandated to do what we've done before. And certainly we are often creatures of habit doing what we like to do, so we keep doing it. But we really do need, with limited resources and such, to prioritize the important things. And then finally, of course, we have to put the effort into packaging and distribution. It's one thing to collect it, it's one thing to use it ourselves. It's vastly more difficult to package and distribute. I don't even know what the order of magnitude difference is, but it's quite large, as I'm sure you all know. So that's within a government side or a producer side. If we think about the other side of it, which Zhao Li talked about when he introduced the whole session, we have issues with respect to engagement. Is the usage community that should be using the data, does it know about it? Can it use the data? Is it sufficiently easy to use? Do we know their usage, which is specifically what he was talking about, because then we can do a better job of producing things that are statistically correct or valuable and easy to use, et cetera. And then, of course, if we know the usage, we can demonstrate value. We will presumably provide this for things that are value. And that goes back to the first topic I mentioned of funding. So we'd like to see that if we could address these challenges, we could maybe gain the benefits that, say, companies that I've worked with previously, Google or Two Sigma, now Blackstone, could get as much, the government could get as much value as these companies have gotten. So what we're proposing is kind of an invisible hand structure, and you'll see that in just a moment. Next slide, please. That's right, thank you. We get people to do the data work, that is to produce the data. An employee of mine at Google, Nithya Simbasavan, actually produced this quote, which is often known. Second, can we try to get better incentives in academia and government? They're more natural in business because many of them are motivated by clear business metrics such as clicks or customer engagement or even dollar signs. And then that means they're realigning our own incentives. So for example, we do talk about in the paper, can we actually now begin to recognize people about important citations to data, not just papers? Next slide, please. As just one example of the problem, and Julia brought this to my attention, but it's a good point to put this in the chart. There was a Nature article that that surveyed 1,792 manuscripts, where there was something in the manuscript that said, we will provide data upon request. We've all seen that. Only 120 provided usable data. So that's a very small percentage. So it shows the problem of providing data externally is really very significant, even if this is just one example. It's so overwhelmingly in one direction that I think it's indicative. Next slide, please. So of course, the other side of it is look at something even, frankly, as relatively simple as Yelp and the just enormous value that we all get from this sort of crowdsourcing and other kinds of information of that form. So somehow or other, we'd like to get to be something more in that domain. So next slide. So what we'd like to see is some way that when we publish quality data, that generates insights and impact among some user communities, because it is quality data with the right focus. We have a chance to measure that. The key thing that we are talking about maybe in this, that's maybe more than what sometimes happens, and some of the people even mentioned it earlier today, the difficulty of ascertaining the value that we're providing to the user community of the data. And we think if we could measure that more, then we would have the incentives to gather more data, to prove what we're doing, the funding and all of that. Frankly, we'd do a better job, because it's extremely exciting when you know the user community. It's much more fun than when it's just a large black hole. And then, of course, that yields the virtuous circle here. So with that, let me turn this over to Julia, who will take away the next few slides in this.
So I'm an economist by training, and so when you think about incentives, what you're really wanting to establish is some kind of reward structure, an incentive structure, so that, for example, both researchers and data producers and agencies in this particular case have the right incentives. Instead of being told what to do, they do it because it's as part of their own self-interest. So that's kind of the idea with democratizing data. So instead of thinking about the butcher being benevolent, we want to be the agencies to be benevolent, the institutions and the researchers. So what's in their own self-interest? So that's basically one of the outcomes of the Democratizing Data Dashboard. So you have an agency like the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. They are able to, in ways that you're going to hear more about separately, both from multiple different sources, to be able to pull out how their data are being used by using machine learning models, and to pull out how their specific data sets are being used, where they're published, what are the journals, what are the authors, and that can be generated automatically for any subset of their data users. So this is survey learned doctorates, and then they can see what topics and what journals things are being produced in. So that can be generated not manually, not by asking people, but automatically by reading publications. For researchers, the incentive is, like everything, get citations, get your name in lights. So if you've used a particular data set, and you can be highlighted and your work can be recognized, and there can be automatic links to your publications. So the essential idea here is not just thinking about this as a cool toy, but also as a fundamental change in the way in which we understand the community of practice within which we operate. Now, of course, usage statistics are one thing, and that might be what we measure. But as Al, who is an old hand at that, pointed out, you've got to be really careful with that. So let me pass it back to Al. Oh, you're on mute, Al.
Right. Sorry about that. So yes, in the next chart. So look, we think that even if we could make this circle work perfectly, we would then certainly highlight the next collection of problems, which we really focus on as maybe the primary focal points in the industry side of things with data at scale. So first is data has to be of incredibly high quality. We've seen all these issues now in the popular press about data and such. I think that we really have to up the game in kind of a order of magnitude, in making sure what we do is unassailably precise and accurate, and that we divulge all of the risks associated with it. Otherwise, we risk doing harm. Second is we do have to make things easy to use. And I think that's we have lots of tools, GitHub and all sorts of things that can make it much easier than it used to be. but it is very important to think about it because putting something out that's too difficult to use won't be used. You heard, I think Stu mentioned that they didn't do work at Schmidt Science in healthcare because of privacy issues in HIPAA. We're not going to all have the benefit of being able to say we can't do work where there's potentially private data involved. Most of us have that set of those issues. So there's very significant privacy and security trade-offs. I've written, I don't know, a sixth of a book on that subject, and that's something we all need to deal with. You heard about Goodhart's law. You get what you measure. I mean, that's something that's just clear. I think if you look at a search engine, a lot of what's going on is the continual need to change the algorithms in the search engine so that it responds properly to search queries, given that everyone knows what you're measuring and are continually changing the nature of their posts so that their results will be in the first 10. So we will have to do and worry about that as well. And then McNamara's fallacy is one that's less well known, but if we do public policy and other things only on the data that's available, we may miss extremely important things. And that's arguably one of the things that went wrong in the US prosecution of the Vietnam War effort. So our objectives, finally, are more complex than in many corporate settings. So evaluating the results is not so easy. It may take a long time to know. It's not something you can measure instantaneously. And then finally, I think it's just a collection of challenges that we'll be pursuing over the long term. So next slide. But we hope to get there. We hope to have these problems. So our virtuous circle is listed there. We think there are enormous benefits. You've heard from the philanthropic community. You've heard from at least some of the statistical agencies. You'll be hearing from many more. We hope that you can harvest and refine these ideas, maybe in keeping with this form of a structure, so that our agencies and research agendas are going to achieve these benefits. Julia.
Thank you so much for that very nice summary, Al. If you want to find out more about this particular tool that's kind of the Yelp or the Amazon.com for data, it's on democratizingdata.ai. We're now going to hear from two other types of approaches, which I hope will get you all excited and interested in working with the stat agencies, working with the philanthropic foundations to kind of push the ideas about incentives that Al has spelled out so eloquently.